Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal, South Carolina, Clemson. I'm a Michigan fan. We got Ohio State this weekend. There is not a college football game on Saturday or this weekend that I'm more excited for than this football game between the Gamecocks and Clemson. We talked about the college football playoff paths for both of these teams over the last couple of weeks. Dill, if you're a South Carolina fan, if you're a Clemson fan, you could not have asked for a better Saturday in terms of college football playoff implications than what we just saw. Bama going down, Ole Miss going down, Indiana getting blown out against Ohio State. Both of these teams will be top 15 teams in the country going into this matchup. And the winner of this football game, I think, puts themselves in a very good spot to make the 12-team college football playoff. So you're talking about a rivalry game with college football playoff implications on the line. This is, if you're a college football fan, this is straight up what you live for. Going to be an elite football game, fired up to get into it. Now, before we do it, as always, South Carolina fans, Clemson fans, let it fly in the comment section. No, it's going to be a bloodbath in the comment section. I wouldn't want to have it any other way. This is what college football is about, so let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, there's some really intriguing matchups that we're going to see in this football game. This Clemson offensive line versus the South Carolina defensive line, that's where it starts to me. Early on in the season, we were kind of like, hey, South Carolina's defense low-key is pretty dang solid, specifically on the defensive line. It's not low-key anymore. We're in the back half of November saying this South Carolina defense is one of the best units that you've seen in the entire country. Going up against the Clemson offensive line that has been banged up, has not looked great the last couple of weeks, really has struggled to run the football, specifically against Pitt 2 weeks ago. That's where it starts for me, Dill. This Clemson rushing attack versus the South Carolina front seven. If you are Clemson, I don't think you expect to run the football for over 200 yards against the front seven of South Carolina that has only given up 3.1 yards per carry. But can you run the football well enough to keep this offense on schedule, take a little pressure off this offensive line and pass protection, avoid those second and third and long situations where you have Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart pinning the ears back after the quarterback? If you can run the football well enough to do those kind of things, I think it gives you a good chance to potentially move the ball against South Carolina. How do you see this Clemson offensive line versus South Carolina defense matching up?
And obviously there's going to be an element like, do you get guys like Tristan Lay and Marcus Tate back? Because those guys being down, I think, again, you felt it a little bit in the pass pro game. You felt it a ton in the run game. They just haven't been able to be as physical, as imposing in that rushing attack without those guys. So they're going to be a huge part of it because, the tough part about playing South Carolina at this point in the season and how well their defense is playing is it's just hard to find ways to just consistently march the ball on them. Because they don't give up a ton of huge plays, especially in the pass game, but also they don't really generate a lot of negative plays. So it's just hard to go 15 play drives in this South Carolina team. One thing I feel like you sleep on a little bit with the rushing attack for Clemson and why I think it's so important is it might be the avenue to hitting a big one, an explosive one. That's something, again, we talk about, it'll certainly be part of what Clemson needs to do because I just don't see them down in, down out, dominating the South Carolina team.
You could say explosive plays are the most important metric in this football game. Whether it's the run game, whether it's the pass game.
No, but you just look at moments where you've seen teams get explosives on South Carolina. A&M was able to get a big run. Mizzou was able to get a handful of them. LSU was able to get a couple of them. Those type of plays because of how aggressive South Carolina likes to play, both at their linebacker spot and their defensive line spot. They'll give you a crease or two once in a while in a football game.
Yeah.
Those, to me, are avenues for Clemson to make some of those 30-plus yard plays that, again, they're going to need to generate a couple of those because at the end of the day, I don't love their ability to just go down, march down.
Yeah, you are right. So explosive plays are important. And my personal take is I don't think you see a ton of explosive plays with Clemson running the football. One, I'm not saying Phil Moffitt can't hit explosive plays. I think he's one of the better backs in the country, been very vocal about that. He's much more of hey, I'm inviting contact and keeping us on schedule.
His style is definitely not the same as the Missouri backs.
And that's been one of the bugaboos for me for Clemson is, you saw some guys emerge against the Citadel, but I don't think that's a great data point. Outside of Phil Moffitt, there hasn't been a back that Clemson is really trusted. They've been just working the workhorse and Phil Maffa. Dill, for me, it's through the air. Like when you look at Clemson and when they've played their best football on offense, it's hitting the explosive plays through the air. And the difference between Clemson from 2023 and 2024, you got difference makers on the outside. I mean, Brian Wesco, TJ Moore, guys that have taken the top off of defenses. That's to me the avenue of creating explosive plays. Because, and I think you're really right saying it's important, because look, it's hard to go 15 plays. Like South Carolina's going to find a negative play at some point. It's hard to stay on schedule against South Carolina. So can you, instead of going 15 plays, 80 yards and scoring, can you go 4 plays, 80 yards, hit an explosive for a touchdown? If Clemson can find a few of those in this football game, that's probably the avenue for them putting points up on the board against South Carolina. Now, flipping the sides here, Dill, you look at the South Carolina offense over the last couple of weeks. I mean, since that Alabama game, there's been one game where they haven't scored more than 34 points, and that was 28 points against Vanderbilt, and they dominated that football game, didn't need to score any more than that. This Clemson defense, to me, it's what version do you get? We've seen some really good versions of Clemson's defense in the first half against Pitt, really largely in that football game against Pitt. It was a pretty damn good performance on the defensive side of the football, specifically in the front seven. 8 sacks, 16 tackles for a loss against Pitt a couple weeks ago. Can you replicate that performance against South Carolina? Because you look at how you can give South Carolina some struggles on offense. It's working against this offensive line, especially in pass protection.
And a lot of it comes down to, can you get LaNorris Sellers on the ground? That's been something that some of the teams that have, like A&M, had their chance to make a lot of negative plays. They just missed a ton of tackles. Their linebackers didn't exactly have the size and strength to deal with LaNorris Sellers' size and strength. You look at Clemson's linebackers, especially with a guy like Barrett Carter. I think he has the chance to really make some of those like monster plays, because that has been one thing that South Carolina has had happen when they lose games. It's LaNorris Sellers making some of those like plays that really make you scratch your head. Like, how could that possibly happen? He hasn't made those in a while. Clemson does have the personnel, I think, to force him into those situations and possibly get one or two of them.
Well, so I think it starts like when you start game planning, right? Dabo Swinney sitting down Sunday morning with his cup of coffee, starting a game plan for South Carolina. It starts with, how do you avoid LaNorris Sellers playing backyard football and killing you? That's been, in my opinion, you've seen 2 really big improvements from LaNorris Sellers over the last couple of weeks. One, as a pure pocket passer, he looks far more comfortable going through his progressions and pushing the ball down the field. But secondly, we knew how dynamic this kid was going back to the summer. Early on in the season, he tried to do some of that backyard stuff, and normally it wouldn't work out well. And you'd see some kind of, like you said, turnovers that would make you scratch your head. Over the last couple of weeks, he's being that dynamic playmaker, trying to do a lot, but also not putting the ball in harm's way all that often. How do you deal with LaNorris Sellers getting outside of the pocket, being that difference maker, an extender of plays? You said it best. Clemson's got the backers. It ain't a lot of linebackers in the country that can deal with LaNorris Sellers and that QB spy look. Barrett Carter is one of them. And so how does Clemson just try to toe that line between, we want to really get after LaNorris Sellers, but also try to keep him in the pocket and avoid him really beating us outside of the pocket? You got a guy in Barrett Carter that can do it. Dill, here's another thing that I got in my notes. Look, Avian Terrell's been awesome. He's been one of the best cornerbacks in the country. He's a little bit smaller. You look at South Carolina, another massive storyline for this team over the last couple of weeks as they begin to play their best football. Playmakers on the outside, starting to be difference makers. A guy like Nick Harbor, who's just a matchup nightmare in terms of the size-speed combination. Can you maybe find some of those matchups that help you? And can you hit some of those explosive plays yourself? That's another storyline I'm looking at here.
Well, and that is because, again, you've really only seen one great game, I'd say, from Nick Harbor. I thought he looked awesome in that Missouri game. You've seen Clemson's secondary be pretty good for pretty much the whole year. I look like that's one matchup that, again, if Clemson can really dominate it, and that's kind of been a story for Clemson's defense all year, is can their boundary cornerbacks, led by Avian Terrell, who, again, like maybe doesn't have the size
it's never been, to be fair, it's never been a problem for Avian Terrell. Like,
he's got the game to do it because he's been doing it pretty much all year. And you just haven't seen any real consistency from these South Carolina wide receivers really until that Missouri game. So that's something you look at, like, if Clemson can really dominate that boundary and be a little bit more tough in the middle, be able to roll their safeties into the box, get a guy like RJ Mickens, assuming he's playing in this game, into the box where, again, he's been a really good tackler, been good at creating negative plays in the run. That I think you can put some pressure on this South Carolina team, because if they don't run the ball particularly well, I think that's going to be a real problem for this.
Well, just like we talked about Clemson running the football to stay out of those third and long spots, I think it's very important for South Carolina to do the same thing. You look at South Carolina, and one of the things they've been really good at is staying on schedule. So instead of 3rd and 7s, where LaNorris has to be that pocket passer, you're in a 3rd and 3, where you can get him outside of the pocket. You can give him that run pass choice. Can Clemson stop the run, which probably includes putting someone like RJ Mickens in the box, because you need an extra body with LaNorris there? Can you get South Carolina into some of those 3rd and long situations where this is very clearly not where they want to operate from? That's the storyline too. Dill, let's get into the pick here. Clemson 3.5-point favorites at home. That was a line that came out before the Saturday games. I'm assuming it's going to be very similar. I'm not sure why you changed your opinion on either of these teams after last week. Who you got here?
I lean Clemson because I think this is going to be a very low-scoring game, frankly. I look at, like, what defense do I think can create the most problems for the opposition. I look at one thing Cade Klubnik probably isn't getting enough credit for. He's not allowing a ton of negative plays to happen from his end. He's not throwing a ton of interceptions. He's not letting this Clemson team get into horrible spots. Like, again, there's been some moments where they just haven't executed well enough. He's missed some throws. They haven't been as explosive as you want, but he hasn't put them in horrible spots. I look like these two defenses, I think, are both problems for the other opposing. Like, I think Clemson's defensive line is a monster problem for the South Carolina team, and you say the same thing about the other side. I just look LaNorris Sellers. I think there's a better chance he gives you one, and I think that's kind of the play that decides it. Like,
I think that's a crazy take to have, that you think if you're asking,
I think again, Cade Klubnik's played clean football for the most part this season. Like, there's been some moments where you want him to execute at a higher level, but he has not put this Clemson team in bad spots. LaNorris Sellers, like, again, he
hasn't lately,
but they haven't had a front seven, I don't think. Maybe Texas A&M, and again, Texas A&M had their shots to make some things happen. They just didn't. Clemson can make those plays. I think they can put themselves in a position to kind of control the tempo of this game, because I just think it's going to be super low scoring. Yeah. And who's going to make the mistake is kind of who you got.
I'll just respectfully disagree with you, brother. Like, you ask me what defense has the bigger opportunity to give the offense problems. Give me that South Carolina defensive line going up against the Clemson offensive line that is decimated with injuries. And they're playing and we'll see who they get back, but they're Walker Parks. He's a career guard. He's a good guard, but he's a career guard. You're telling me Walker Parks probably has something to do with that. Dealing with Kennard and Dylan Stewart. Give me South Carolina here. And I'm kind of with you. 3.5 points. I'll just take the points with South Carolina. I think this is going to be a phenomenal game, probably a low-scoring game. But I think South Carolina has kind of shown to be the team that can win some of those games when it matters most. I think South Carolina, quite frankly,
how good a little bit Clemson's defense can be. Like, they weren't particularly. No,
but see, we can't go down that avenue of late November saying, "Oh, this is a defense that's good." Like, they haven't played like that. They're on paper. I think they're a very good defense. I thought it was going to be a top 10 defense in the country heading into the year. But we are with the date right now, November 24th. We can't just say on paper they're good. What have you done for me? I don't think they've been good enough. What defense has been better? Give me South Carolina. That's why I'm taking South Carolina in this game. Appreciate you guys rocking with it again. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.